here's Brody Brazil.
As you're very well aware, the Oakland A's season came to a conclusion yesterday, and here I am already today putting together this 2022 season in review. That's right. I didn't want to wait long. I wanted to capture these thoughts while they were fresh. I didn't want them to escape me. I wanted to document them and now present them in this video for you. And I say for you because I guarantee what's going to happen in the coming days or weeks. You're going to turn on the television, you'll be jonesing for A's baseball because it becomes part of your routine over the summer, and then all of a sudden you realize, oh yeah, it's not there. Isn't it amazing how that happens? And how weird it is, like today. I have no baseball game to cover. You have no baseball game to watch. We'll get used to it eventually, but it's always a shock to the system when the season ends. And let me just say this, for as frustrating as this past season was, results-wise and win-loss-wise, yeah, I'm still not ready for it to end, I don't think. I was still having a good time, still fun to watch, and that is coming off what was the second worst season in Oakland history. So let's just get right into that. 102 losses to go with their 60 wins. The only worst season in Oakland history was 1979. When they lost 108 games. We have to put this in perspective here. I wasn't even alive in 1979. Almost, but not yet. And so it was the worst season for the A's in my lifetime. And chances are, knowing the demographics of this YouTube channel, probably the worst season of your lifetime watching the Oakland A's. I say that because it really is necessary to understand the magnitude of just how much this group struggled. And not largely by surprise, right? We go back to spring training and we saw all the departures literally in a handful of days. Chapman, Olson, Minaya, Bassett, not to mention Canna, Marte, Harrison, Frankie Montas during this season. I mean, it was the roster greatly changing how it looked over the course of the last 8-10 months. And I don't think the expectation was there that this group would find a huge amount of success. But obviously, to get to triple-digit losses for only the second time in Oakland history, you really have to realize what happened here. And also the fact that this team, this past season, they spent 150 days in last place. There wasn't really a great start to this year, although it was respectable in April. We'll get to that. There wasn't a tremendous middle part or finish. I mean, they did go a couple games over 500 in July, which we'll also get to, but this is rare territory for the Oakland A's, obviously. And so I just want to establish that. I also want to use this analogy. Like, what did we just witness? Have you ever pruned a plant, right? That was beautiful, had a lot of flowers, and I'm not saying it was overgrown for the Oakland A's, but you know what happens here when you start to trim and cut down, and you kind of get down to the roots, and all the flowers are gone, by the way. So some people will look at the plant and say, well, that's not as beautiful anymore. And that's true. But at some point, that plant grows back, maybe just as healthy, maybe even healthier. I'm not saying that's a fun process. I'm not saying you like to look at that plant every time you walk past it in your yard. But you know that if you take care of it, it'll grow back and you'll be happy with it all over again. That's kind of what this past Oakland A's season was. In spring training, all the pruning was done. All the trimming was done. And let's be honest, there just were not a lot of flowers for this team this season. I don't want to take away from individual accomplishments and efforts. It's not about that, right? I don't mean to be crude here by any means or disrespectful, but big picture-wise, if you look at the franchise as a whole, it got trimmed down. So hopefully what we witnessed from 2022 to 2023 are some buds starting to pop up. The beginning of new flowers starting to emerge. Because this was not normal. Somebody asked me at one point, is this the worst A's season you've covered? Because you've been around for a while. Yeah, I've been doing this since the early to mid 2000s with the Oakland A's. My response was, yeah, it's the worst season of my lifetime. So definitely it's the most frustrating season to cover. Again, that being said, I just want to close this part out by establishing that even though we watched like Oakland history take place, I still wasn't ready for the year to be over yesterday. Isn't that amazing? As bad as it was, as rough as it was, and in a situation covering sports where winning cures everything, like winning makes everything easier to discuss and talk about and analyze and break down, I still was not done with this team. And I know Mark Kotsay had the same sentiment. Yeah, we're not rushing to get out of here. I could have gone more. I could have gone longer in this season. So I think in a weird way, that says something, that says a lot. Let's look at this team month by month. You remember in April, flirting with 500? They had that good road trip through Philly and Tampa. And a lot of people thought, well, wait a second, they just completely tore down here. And they've done this before where they emerge a lot quicker and a lot more unexpectedly. But that was kind of a mirage. And I can't really explain why it happened in April. They were hitting the heck out of the ball. Remember in the first month, runners in scoring position was tremendous. On-base percentage was pretty respectable. So they were doing it offensively. They were fresh. Their rotation, their staff, their bullpen, everything was working out pretty well. And it got them a 10-11 record. Then in May, a higher volume of games, full month, 10-21. So slipping for sure. But it was June where things really fell off the table. 5-21. You go from 10 wins in a month, like a half month almost, 2/3 of a month, to 10 wins in a full month, to 5 wins in a full month. And what's crazy is that contrast between June and July. 5 wins in June, 14 wins in July. And July was weird because it's obviously segmented by the All-Star break. It was the only winning record month for the A's this season. But it was good to see. It kind of did set a tone that at least we know we're in trouble, right, in June. But there was that response, there was that statement. And I would also say June into July was when you started to see the transition of some younger players getting brought up, getting more playing time. You know, the trade deadline at the beginning of August. It was a very transitional month going into, all of the new guys for August and September, but it was just kind of good to see that mid-season there at least was a sign of life. August 10-17, okay, kind of pedestrian, but then September, again, things really falling off the map. 7-19, it was second worst to that June month, and I don't know if fatigue set in or just a rough part of the schedule or too many young guys with maybe not experience, too many learning curves taking place. You can't even really pinpoint it on one thing. Well, I can actually. It was largely offensively related, which we'll get to in a second, but you can just see month by month how this thing fell apart. And also, I didn't put October on here, but 4-1 in October, including the last 4 wins in a row. So I do have to say that I like seeing this team win their last 4 games, 2 of them in walk-off fashion. Game 162 was tremendous with Stephen Vogt and the electricity. This team did not come off the rails. I think that's important to document here. Despite all of this and despite all the changes and the 64 total players they used, this team still did not completely come apart, even because, look, in June, 5-21, they didn't go 5-21 again in July or that same proportion. So I think that's proof right there. This team, while they struggled and while they didn't have all the advantages, they never came completely undone. This was the biggest story of the season for me, why they struggled. Because defense came and went. There were sequences, high error totals, and miscues defensively. I think their starting rotation was largely respectable. And I'll get to who I think was the most consistent performer there in just a second. And their bullpen came and went too with struggles and success. I think with the rotation, just going back to that for a second, your starters can pitch as well as they can, but they're obviously better with run support. And to that point, they didn't get a lot of run support here. 216 is how they finished with a team average. That was the lowest in all of baseball. And it was the worst team batting average in A's franchise history, not just Oakland franchise history, A's franchise history going all the way back to 1908. 1908. And even in that season, I think they've added 221. I should have included it here, but it was in the 220s. So at least like 5 percentage points higher. I mean, what was baseball even like in 1908? Completely different, more than 100 years ago. This was what held the A's from competing and winning a lot more games this year. There were so many nights where the A's would lose 4-1, 4-2, and Oakland would have 2 or 3 hits total. They only gave themselves a chance to win. They only gave themselves a chance to win this year when they put up some runs. And look, that's obvious for all teams. But there were so many nights where the A's offense scored in maybe 1 inning or only had 2 or 3 hits. I can't tell you how many times this year they flirted with getting no hit through 5, through 6, through 7, or even into the 8th inning like Shohei Ohtani did in his second to last start of the season. And by the way, the A's did avoid that no-hitter. They were 4 outs away from it. Oakland has the longest active avoidance streak of no-hitters in Major League Baseball. They're the last ones remaining that have not been no-hit the longest. You know what I'm trying to say. It was 1991, 31 years ago, was the last time the A's got no-hit. It was a combined effort by the Baltimore Orioles at the Coliseum. So they have gone so long. Longest active streak of avoiding no-hitters in baseball. But it almost happened on a few occasions this year. You know that saying, which I'll clean up here, mess around and find out? They messed around with that this year. And luckily they didn't find out, because that would not have been fun to get no hit. But it almost happened. And they just, again, struggled with run support, struggled with staying competitive in games. They lost their ability to hit home runs, clearly. Like, that's how they used to keep themselves in games. Get a couple runners on, Matt Olson goes yard, all right, you're up 3-1. Didn't hit a lot of homers this year, couldn't produce offense in other ways, couldn't get on base, couldn't have a good average. For me, the number one Achilles heel of the Oakland A's in 2022 was the inability to produce runs. And Mark Kotsay tried different lineup orders, different situations. They just could not produce on a regular basis. And obviously the team average is compiled of player averages, but you look a lot of days down the lineup and there were some rough batting averages. The Mendoza line was prevalent for the Oakland A's. So it's not even to point the finger at one person. It's not the middle of the order that struggled. It wasn't the top of the order. It wasn't the 7, 8, 9 hitters. It was the entire group that just had a real problem staying consistent offensively. So this right here, you want to know how they lost 100 games? Was it a little bit of team defense? Yeah, they went through some rough patches of making, errors in like 4 of 7 games and 5 of 8 games. That happened. Was it the bullpen who blew some late leads, some close margins? Yeah, that did happen too. Was it the starters a couple times who, had the throwaway games? Yeah, that did happen. Not regularly, but this was the most consistent struggle point for the Oakland A's, their offense. All right, let's move on to the roster makeup, the season, the type of year it was. A franchise record, 64 players used by the Oakland A's. That is a lot. Essentially, let's call it 2 rosters worth, between 2 and 3 rosters worth of players used this season. 33 rookies and 22 major league debuts for the Oakland A's. Think about that. 22 young men came in that clubhouse and played their first major league game in an A's uniform this season. That's almost, you're getting close to a full roster of players mid-season. And all of this, I think it needs to be established, it was not necessarily because of injuries. There were 22 IL stints. I think there were also 9 COVID-related IL stints for players. Some of it was because of physical ailments. We should establish that. But this team did not have a gigantic amount of injuries. They did not have to use the injured list a tremendous amount of times. This is because they cycled through their pipeline, their roster, their personnel. I didn't look up how many starting lineups Mark Kotsay ended up using, but I would imagine in 162 games, I bet you there were 157 different lineup cards, right, with just small changes here and there. It was a constant game of musical chairs, and again, I'm mentioning this to show you how transitional this season was, but it's also important to recognize that without a Mark Kotsay, without a Chad Pinder, without a Stephen Vogt, without a core group of leadership, even Elvis Andrus when he was there, did a great job until the very end, being a leader of this team. Without those key players, this is where it comes a little bit off the rail. When you don't have that experience, you don't have anybody to look up to. They did in those handful of names, and there were a few more names. Cole Irvin in that group, Frankie when he was there, James Caprillion, somebody to look up to. My point being is, look how literally green the green and gold were this year. You don't see these type of numbers every season. So it's part of the pruning process, right? These are some of the new roots and new branches starting to grow. Cole Irvin, for me, was the most consistent starter in the rotation. And I don't think there's a lot of question about that. I think I'm largely stating the obvious. 9-13 record, but again, record is an indication of team's performance as well, run support, like what can they do offensively and defensively to keep you in the game. 3.98 ERA. It was above 4 before he pitched a scoreless final outing just yesterday to close out 2 days ago to close out the season. And so I know that was a big deal for him to get that ERA sub 4 again. 3.98, 30 starts. Healthy from start to finish. I don't need to knock on wood anymore. He made it, right? It's challenging for a lot of starters, even in this day and age, to make the 30 start mark. 181 innings pitched. I know he talked about, next year as a goal to try and get to 200. That would be a great accomplishment. And Cole Irvin just so efficient. I want you to look at the walks per 9 inning and the home runs per 9 inning averages there. 1.8 walks per 9 innings. Just goes to show you, every time he pitches 5, 6, or 7, let's say, he probably only walks 1. That's a tremendous discipline to stay away from those free passes. And same thing with the long ball. And he did have some hit off him this year, no question, but 1.2 dingers per 9 innings, that's a pretty nice ratio to have, to go along with the 1.16 whip. Walks and hits per innings pitched. Not a strikeout guy. I didn't put that on here. But he's a guy that gets outs, induces ground balls, and gets you out of innings. So Cole Irvin, for me, most consistent starter on the A's rotation this year. And I didn't think, honestly, with Blackburn was the all-star. First half he had was among the best we've seen in a long time. And Frankie got on a roll, but then got injured and then came back and was healthy, but then got traded. So he's not in that mix. James Caprillion started the season late, had a couple really nice surges, had a couple really nice performances, but they were just a little spotty. I love Cap. I hope next year he can just take what he did and put it in more of a consistent fashion like Cole Irvin. A couple other pitchers to name too in the rotation. Actually, I'm going to save Sears and Waldichuk for later, right? They were the newcomers after the trade deadline, so we will break them down in a second. But I think when you look at the big body of work, and there's only a couple names who made it start to finish, or even most of the season, but Cole Irvin, for me, backbone and cornerstone of the A's rotation. All right, let's talk JP Sears and Ken Waldichuk. I think what you saw from them was enough to pencil them in for the rotation in 2023, right? Came over to the A's via a trade, and you're just really excited about the potential, and you needed some starters, and you can instantly see that in this year of transition for them and a lot going on and figuring out, their new team and an everyday opportunity that now all of a sudden they have, and there might be, look, in their next season, their first full season, there might be a couple steps back here along the way, but refreshing to see two pitchers that you can already instantly kind of plug in. A lot of times a pitcher comes up to the major leagues and they're in the bullpen to start, and then they get the starting opportunity and maybe they stick, or they go back and forth for a while. For me, Sears and Waldichuk, there's no bullpenning here. There's no going back down to AAA here. In my mind right now, along with Cole Irvin and Caprillion, Sears and Waldichuk are in there for 2023. So of all the young players and future players we saw to emerge this year, the Nick Allens, the Jonah Brides, the Shea Langoliers, the Diazes, I could go down the list. Clement, most recently at third base. I feel like Sears and Waldichuk as pitchers, and I named a lot of position players there, they just really emerged as, okay, I see them in that role next year. I see Langoliers obviously catching. I see Nick Allen as the shortstop next year. A lot of the other names, I'm not exactly sure how, when, where. We'll find out, right? That's part of this process. But I think it's clear to me what their roles are for next year. Sean Murphy, team MVP, and I say backstop, but obviously that's his position, catching. That's obvious. Backstop in a sense that, yeah, he caught the games, but who else was going to clean up or hit third or fourth? Who was going to be a heart of the order hitter for this team besides Seth Brown? Sean Murphy, right? And for Murph, optimally on a team that's littered with hitters like the A's used to be, he's probably realistically a 5 or a 6 hitter. Just in that, and no disrespect, but that's probably where he contributes the most and the best. I think for him to be in that cleanup spot a lot, or that 3-hole a lot, it just goes to show you what he's capable of. He's got power. He's a great hitter. Didn't always get to display that this season, but when I say team MVP, let's step back. Let's step back from the criticism for a second. There's not much. I think with him to lead this staff, to handle the bullpen, to literally be a calming presence. Guy didn't flip out at all. Doesn't show a lot of emotion. He's very even keel. I think there's no question for me who the most consistent, I want to say performer, but presence was for the A's this year. And who else would you pick for the team MVP? Seth Brown, Tony Kemp. Maybe they're in that conversation, but Murph, if I have to look up, Murph probably played the most games at one of the key, middle of the field positions. And I say it's not like it's by default it's Sean Murphy, but I think of all the teammates that he had that left, and now all of a sudden, hey, you're thrust into being a leader here. And he only had one full season. 2021 was his first full big league season, right? Got called up at the end of 19. 2020 was a very shortened season. 21 was his first full big league season. And here he was in 2022, struggling a bit, but also, didn't have the same protection in the lineup, didn't have the same rotation to work with, wasn't surrounded by the same scenery as he used to be. So I give Sean Murphy a lot of credit for continuing to perform, continuing to lead, continuing to do his thing, despite everything that changed around him. How about Mark Kotsay? Speaking of changing around him, do you remember the day that he became the A's manager? And it was official. That team still had Chapman, Olsen, Manaea, Bassett, Frankie Montas. It was an entirely different looking team, as opposed to the team he took the field with game 1 of 2022. But I just want to say, among all the people that I mentioned before that helped keep this group on the rails, the voters, the Pinders, everybody else in between, Mark Kotsay was kind of perfect for this team in this situation. I loved Bob Melvin as the A's manager. I was disappointed when I knew it was all coming to an end and he went to join the San Diego Padres. But that was me being selfish. It was all I was accustomed to. I knew the job he did. You know what? In retrospect, seeing how the A's changed the landscape of their team and their franchise, I don't know that I wanted Bob Melvin to be at the helm of that. I'm happy that he's in the playoffs again. I mean, this is more of a Mark Kotsay job, a man who had never managed any baseball game. Well, he said he'd managed some travel games for one of his kids, but had never managed a real professional baseball game ever before this season, which is laughable, right? Because you know he's capable of it. If there's a baseball guy who understands the game, the players, this franchise that he played for a couple years, it's Mark Kotsay. So there was no question, will he be good at this? But I'm actually happy that it was him and that he got to, slowly edge his way into this new job in what was a season that was already, it's not like they threw him into a playoff-bound team and said, good luck, hope this works out for you. But also his demeanor. I mean, I know he's competitive. He does not like to lose 102 games. But the situation is what it is. He did the best he could. He kept them focused. He kept the blinders on, everybody. Don't worry about all this stuff out here. Just do what you're doing, get better. This isn't necessarily optimal, but we're going to keep pushing forward. I was very thrilled when it was Mark Kotsay for the job. And I think, how many times do you say this? Let me close this thought out with this. How many times do you look at a Major League Baseball team that lost 102 games and not point the finger? Like, it was the manager's fault. Or even this, it was the front office's fault. I don't point the finger at Mark Kotsay. David Forst and Billy Beane, I don't think it was their favorite thing to do to overhaul the roster either. They said that. You actually look at Mark Kotsay and say, he was not part of the team losing 102 games. He was part of keeping them together and getting them to 60 wins. As crazy as that might sound. And if you don't watch the A's, you maybe don't understand this. But if you watched them this season, it's pretty clear to me that one of the reasons they stuck together, a positive, is actually Mark Kotsay. Definitely not part of the negative. So, look, I'm happy that he's in this job. He's got 1 year under his belt. He's going to get to come up with this team. Like we said, they trimmed the plant down. They pruned it. He's going to be able to grow with this plant and with these new flowers that will bud and will emerge. Yeah, it was good to have Mark Kotsay this past year. All right, how about the first full season without Ray Fosse? It was about a year ago now that he passed. I say unexpectedly. We knew he was sick for a while. But we didn't know that he had been battling illness and cancer for a long time. And we are so fortunate on the television side to have had Dallas Braden for the prior, 5-6 years? I mean, imagine if Dallas had not been around and somebody new had to jump in there with Kipe and do all our television work. It in a sense, I'm glad that DB had been there, because this year did not feel entirely abnormal. In a sense, right, that you didn't get the wows. You didn't get all the Rayisms. But I think as much as we can evaluate this team and on the field and stats and X's and O's, sure. And we talked a lot about that. How about the experience of watching an A's game? It was different. It was definitely different. So I just wanted to take this time and notate that we missed him. We talked about him a lot in 2023. I don't plan on moving on entirely still. I think as long as it feels right, we'll keep bringing him up. We'll keep tributing him. I said yesterday when Stephen Vogt hit that homer in his last at-bat, what was Ray Fosse going to say about that? Somewhere, what did Ray Fosse say about that? What was his reaction to that? So that type of stuff is going to continue. I just want to make it clear that, we just did a full season without Ray, which is the first Oakland A's season in a long time, literally since 1972. that did not feature Ray. Stu, on happier news, Stu got his number retired this year. That was fantastic. The ceremony, the lead up to it, all the tributes, the segments we were able to put together. And that was a long time coming because it was announced in 2019 that this was going to happen in 2020. Obviously, that didn't make sense. And even when they thought about pushing it to 2021, that still didn't make sense either because crowds were limited and things were not. I mean, not here to say things are still entirely normal, but it was good to be able to do this here in 2022. Long overdue. And as a personal close friend of mine, like, to watch Stu go through this and get honored. And he's not a man who, he appreciates it, but he doesn't thrive off this. He didn't ask for this. He doesn't need this. But I think when he witnessed it and experienced it, it overwhelmed him. And deserving, and he's not done with all his giving back to the community financially or in presence or presence, not presents like gifts. I mean, like presence, like being there. It's just been amazing to watch the love for him come back out again. So, and also to think this, every time you and I will ever walk in the Coliseum again, we'll always be able to look up there and see his name and number. That is so cool. Surrounded by a bunch of other Hall of Famers up there, sparks the conversation. Should he have ever been considered for that? Is that a snub from Cooperstown? But the bottom line is, I love the fact that the A's finally got around to recognizing him in the right way. And so of all the things that I'll also remember from this season, besides the struggles and the change and the transition, that memory has to be up there too. So that's it. That's my 2022 in review for the Oakland A's. Let me know what you think about all this in the comments section below. And thank you so much for watching.